Well, welcome everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jason Rea. I am the Chief Learning Officer of Founding Forward, the 501c3 of the Union League of Philadelphia. Is our focus to provide civic education based on the historical collection of the Union League and to serve not only our members, but the general public in our student and teacher and other programs that we do. And we are incredibly excited. And all of that, everything that we do, speaker programs like this, the teacher programs, there's a group of teachers out in Western PA right now studying the French and Indian War by visiting French and Indian War historic sites. All of that is made possible by you and folks like you who support these programs. And so thank you. Thank you to all of you who have been supporting us and all of you who decide by the end of this amazing evening that you want to support us. My friend Laura in the back, in the red and black, and Kristen are both here to make that possible. So please just speak to one of them or myself or Mr. Miko or the person who is about to come up in just a minute, Dr. Gary Dorsheimer. But before we do that, just a couple of quick things about today. We are going to do Q&A. We will do it toward the end. We ask that you be able to end your couple of sentences with a question mark so that it is actually a question. And that will make everything go more quickly and be better for everyone. We also ask that you wait for a microphone. We'll have 2 roving microphones. The reason for that is not because this is a big room, but it is because we are simulcasting on YouTube, and there will be people who will come back and watch later, and we want them to be able to hear your great questions. So just give us a signal that you would like to ask a question, and then wait for the microphone to come to you. And we will get your question, and we'll get in as many as we possibly can. And so I think that covers everything. Dr. Dorsheimer, would you please introduce tonight's guest?
Thank you and welcome everybody, and thank you for your generosity to make these programs happen. It's wonderful to have one up here at Torresdale. We have a couple at Liberty Hill. There'll be one. This one will be at National as well, but obviously the home base of Center City. We were very grateful for everything that you do to help us fulfill this mission to our Union League members and guests. And for the increasing work that Founding Forward is going to do in the community and across the country. But it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kerry Sautner. She's the President and Chief Executive Officer of Eastern State Penitentiary Historic Site, a museum interpreting the legacy of American criminal justice reform from the site of the world's first penitentiary. Before assuming her current role, Dr. Sautner served as the Chief Learning Officer at the National Constitution Center, where she oversaw all aspects of the center's visitor experience and educational programming. Before joining the National Constitution Center in 2006, she worked on program development at the Franklin Institute and served as an adjunct professor at Drexel and at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Sautner obtained her doctorate in education leadership and management from Drexel University. She earned her master's degree in education from Drexel as well, and a bachelor's degree in biology and marine science from Rutgers University, which we'll see how that morphs into her talk on Eastern State Penitentiary. So please welcome longtime friend and partner of Founding Forward, Dr. Kerry Sautner.
I always appreciate when people get to that section of my bio and they look at the biology degree, which is even funnier because it's biology and marine sciences. And then their head spins. They're like, it makes no sense. It is amazing to have a well-rounded education. And I do appreciate that for my educational years and how much all the different topics that we learn in our life really help build our understanding of the world we live in and how we engage with each other. I am really awesome person to have on a boat, not because I can fish well, but I can tell you everything about the waves and how they move and then which creatures you pull up from the bottom of the sea. My dad finds it quite entertaining, but he said it really probably wasn't worth the expense of that degree. But you know what? It helps in the long run. And I have to do a lot of science now at Eastern State Penitentiary. It's around the historic site. It's around preservation, but it's useful because when we talk about dangerous materials that they've used in the 1800s, I can read a chem lab book and like an OSHA regulation like nobody's business. So it has finally paid off. It's coming full circle. A little bit about Eastern State, we'll dive into it, a little bit about the work that we're doing, and a whole lot of conversation. So you can ask all the questions when we wrap this up, but I probably will be asking you all questions as we go, because if you didn't notice, 2 of those degrees are education degrees, and a good educator asks a lot of questions and listens to the answers and has a dialogue. So that's what I love to do. So I'll try to keep that moving as we go through. My doctorate work, I actually got my doctorate while I was at the National Constitution Center. And was at the National Constitution Center, I launched a program called Policing in a More Perfect Union. And that program trained every single police officer in Philadelphia from 2015 on till 2023 when I left. And it trained every police officer, both new recruits and in service in Camden County for those time spanned, as well as Virginia. This program really looked at the meaning of justice and fairness in our society, how we have grappled with it as Americans over time, and how it affects the way we see each other in our society and our government and our relationships in our neighborhoods. So I had been quite happy at the Constitution Center doing that work. And then this job popped up and it felt like an amazing storm of all the great different areas that I had worked with in my life, and ways to really unpack and dig into what I believe is a founding question for us in America is, have we established, and what do we do to establish fairness and justice in our society? So you will hear me constantly reference the Constitution because it's what we believe in. It's what we use. It's what we believe we should shore up when we see things are weak, and what we believe we want to add to when we see things that aren't strong enough. So we'll be pulling that into a lot of this conversation. And it starts there. So when I left the Constitution Center, somebody asked me, like, is it going to be really hard for you to pivot and switch from what you've been doing to this? And I'm like, no, it's the same story. It literally is. It's just the flip side of that coin. So these are some of my favorite images here, and I'll explain the cat in a minute. So the images here talk about the site as it stood in 1829, but that's not the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story begins with these conversations around the Declaration of Independence in 1776. And then in 1787, in September, we get the United States Constitution. It's signed in September, it takes about a year to ratify, but this idea that we believe in a fair and just society. We believe that people are treated equally, that the laws are in front of people and that those laws can be followed. And then what are all the implications around it? We talk so much about that founding when we talk about rights and responsibilities, but we talked about one side of that conversation. One side of that conversation is the rights that you have, the fact that the government cannot do this to you. It has to follow a pre-agreed upon set of rules that are transparent, that are clear, and that are governed and lived by we the people. The Constitution starts with we the people. That's the first time in the world that full agency is in some ways saying that the people run this country, the people run this government, and the people give it life and breathe life into it. Sure, we know at that time we're not talking about all the people. We're talking about wealthy, white, property-owned males. We get it. But hold that for a second and understand they had never even done that before. Like, that is game-changing. And as they're doing that and they're writing that Constitution at the same time in Independence Hall, and raise your hand, who's been in Independence Hall? Okay, now I'm gonna flip that. Who has it? I'm not gonna publicly shame you. I won't. Okay, if you would raise your hand to that second question, you might want to be a tourist and just go see Independence Hall. It's amazing. And I will tell you my favorite thing about Independence Hall. It's a little quick nerdy thing about Independence Hall. I had for years taken hundreds and hundreds and thousands of teachers to Independence Hall. And to take a social studies teacher to Independence Hall, you watch their mind explode. It's like a kid in a candy shop. They've lost their mind. They can't handle it. They're running around. A lot of Independence Hall and a lot of the historic district is not original. It's the easiest way to say it. But when you walk into Independence Hall and you walk on those bricks, 95% of those bricks are original. So just pause for a minute when you walk through that. And they always saw me touching the bricks as I walked in, because it's crazy to think like Hamilton walked here. Like all these people walked here. And this is the same spot I'm touching. Now, if you're in there with a group of teachers that have ever been in a program that I ran for the last 20 years, you'll see them touching the bricks too. And now you'll know why, because there is something to be in that moment, in that place. So back to Eastern State, in that moment, in that place, as we have the greatest thinkers of the time, and to be honest, not the A-list, a lot of them were the B-list team that were writing the Constitution, because the A-list team didn't want to write a government that had that much power. And they were like, no, you guys are going to create a mess. We're going to leave you there. Now they had some A-list players, like Washington was there, but Madison's not an A-list player at the time. He's brilliant, but he's still on the B team. And I'm going to use the only few sports analogies I know, but please don't question me on them because I'm terrible at sports. Hamilton's not an A-list player. He's got a great reputation, but he's younger. You've got John Jay, those guys, they're not coming to this. They've got this group of people that are trying to figure out how to make it work when writing the Constitution. And what are they watching at the same time? They're watching people come in on those same bricks. Every single different type of person in Philadelphia at that time. Enslaved people, free people, women of wealth, women of poverty are all walking in that same area. And as they walk through those bricks, they're going to hear judgments for cases that they've been debating, cases that they've brought to court. And they've also being judged themselves and punished. They're watching all of this happen. And right behind them is the Walnut Street jail. And they're watching the unbelievable violence that happens within the Walnut Street jail. It is not a jail like we think of jails today. It is basically a large room with poor ventilation, where if people are held, they're accused of something, they're going to court, they are held, locked in there, no food, no water, no security. And this is everyone. There are children, there are men, there are women, there's everyone. And all of this unbelievable violence is happening, and it's a very punitive system of punishment. So as they're writing this Constitution that defines for the world that we the people believe in justice, we believe that you have a right to liberty, a right to freedom, and a right to pursue happiness, defining happiness very different than we do today, but divine happiness. They're also grappling with, when do we take it away? And how do we take it away? And what is that balance? Because the social contract that you have with your government is that you give it power, and its job is to keep you safe. That's the struggle. That's the tension between the power that you give the government and the community and the safety that you have. And there's a balance through that, through laws. So they're watching these people. They're watching the public punishment of people in front of Independence Hall. Remember, it's Pennsylvania State House. It becomes the city major form of government. At one point in time, about 5 years later, it is all three at once. It's a city government, it's a state government, it's the national government, all three at once. All of this is happening at the Pennsylvania State House, and they're watching it. And they are not immune to this. And these conversations begin before 1787, but before the Constitution is written, there's a group that comes together as the Prison Society. And of course, we have two greats to really thank for that. One's a group of religious people, and one is one of many names, but one name you can always say lands really strongly in Philadelphia. So any guesses who really kind of culminates and brings the Prison Society together to look for the humane treatment of prisoners as well as the goal of prisons in itself? Any guesses? Franklin, good answer. Very good. In general, Franklin's always a strong answer. And if it's a group of religious people in Philadelphia, who is it? Very good. I want to make a t-shirt that just says, if you're not sure, just say the Quakers. You're totally fine. I'm like, if you say the Quakers, you're pretty strong on anything. They come together. It's May. They form the Prison Society. And now they're trying to figure out, what do we do? and they grapple with key questions. And one of the questions that we ask every single visitor that comes to Eastern State or engages with our program is, what is the purpose of prisons? So I'll ask you all this, and no stress, no wrong answers. You can throw out anything you want. What's the purpose of prisons? So who wants to share? And we're going to do a bad job because you're going to tell me that people are in Zoom and I can repeat the answer if you don't have to want to run around the mic just yet. So what's the punishment? Punishment. That's a key one, always shared. Punishment. What else? I'm going to point to the lady in the black. Reform. Very good. Reform. Removing people who cause a disruption to society, away from society, protecting society. So it's a protection area too. Good one. Yep. Good. Yeah, I would thank you for saying it. Disincentivizing people from creating more crime. Very good. Anything else? Deterrence. Deterrence. Perfect. They go hand in hand. Repent. Perfect. So when it starts to explain, all of those things start to explain why Eastern State looks the way it does. So I started a year ago, and one day my car was broken and I had my teenager drive me to work. He's dropping me off at work. He's groggy because God forbid a kid wake up before 8 a.m. and drop me off at work. And all I hear mumbling from the driver's seat is, I forgot you work in a straight up castle. And I was like, yes, you are right. It is. It looks very intense. It is a straight up castle. It is put out on what's called Cherry Hill. It's a cherry orchard. So this is the outskirts of Philadelphia. At the time, it is not open till technically the first prisoner is where they consider the opening date. It's 1829. But this work began long before that. But this is the outskirts, and it is out there. There's a couple reasons, and thinking about the reasoning that you gave of why prisons exist. Look at the architecture, and what do you really notice about that architecture that either complements that or kind of it actually complements all of them in different ways? Any guesses? Take a look at that architecture. Yeah, it looks like a fortress. You're not going to be able to get back out of it. Number one. What else? Anything else that you notice? Yeah, it's really far out, and that was a part of it. So if you're standing here and the Eastern State is behind you and you look to your right, that you would head towards the art museum. That's the easiest way to kind of orient yourself. When you head down to the art museum, again, that's not there. This is really the boondocks. When we think about it, it is really outskirts. For context, in 1776, Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence at the Graff House. That is on Market Street and 8th. It is right on the corner. Constitution High is right behind it. The old Atwater Kent was right there. He went to that lodging because it was in the country. That was in 1776. That was a country setting, and he could have peace and quiet and be able to write the Declaration. This is even further out. If you go to Logan Circle with the beautiful fountain in it, which I'm sure probably a lot of you have driven by, that was before this in the 1600s. It was the public gallows. It was before that, it was the Quaker burial ground, and then it became the public gallows. And this is off on Cherry Hill, up high. And Fairmount is, no kidding, a mount is a very high point of Philadelphia. So you would see that from 2 miles away. And you talked about a deterrent. Like something you could see it in the distance, and that would say, don't do anything wrong, you're over here. That it doesn't always unpack the social ills that are going on at the time and really trying to understand why are people committing crimes, and then what is the labeling around those crimes. So we kind of have to unpack all of those pieces. But what was key to the Quakers, and you can see it in the architecture, especially when you see inside, was about rehabilitation and about building skills, workforce development. These are two key things. When the Quakers looked at the violence and the setting of Walnut Street Jail, what they believed is that we were not doing right by God, that every single one of us had an inner light inside of them, and that all we had to do in a strong society was help our citizens who strayed to find that inner light. And if you found that inner light, you could find God, you could find a skill and a trade. And then when you left, you would be able to give back to society, that you'd re-engage as a citizen. So this idea that this penitentiary was a place of penance was one where you would find remorse, and the architecture would really kind of add to that. When I walk through this site, it is the weirdest things that you hear. You see people saying, oh, that looks awful. Wow, that's beautiful. And it's this back and forth because it is gorgeous. It reminds me of an abbey. Some of the abbeys that I've seen across Europe and in France, like it has those beautiful sight lines. The architecture is gorgeous. The detail in the architecture is fantastic as well. But this idea that you would come, that you would find your inner light, that you would be reset with a skill and go back to society. Really, they followed it through. They did some testing of this at the Walnut Street Jail before they opened Eastern State, but that was the goal to bring citizens back. So some of the things that they made around that was, you know what? We're going to make it anonymous. When you come into Eastern State, nobody's going to know that you came in. We're going to have a hood over your head, and you will come in and you will leave with that hood over your head. So nobody will know that you were in there and that you left, that there wouldn't be a scarlet letter associated with you for the rest of your life, that it wouldn't be held on. No prison sentence was over 2 years. They were all under 2 years because they did not believe that long penance was what was needed. They believed that that solitary, that you were alone in your cell to find that inner light, that you were given the beauty of this church-like setting to find remorse, that you were given a Bible, and that once a day a pastor would stop by and speak to you, or a religious leader would stop by and speak to you, and that you would build your skills and trades inside. All of that in theory sounds fantastic. It sounds like a brilliant idea. But what do we know about human beings? What do we know about human beings being alone? What does it do to you? You can say it. Yeah, very quickly too. So if any of you are ever at Eastern State, please text me at John and Jason, they can get you my information. There is one section of Eastern State that still has the original cells. It is the hospital wing. It is closed off because there is so much there in the hospital wing that's original and irreplaceable, but you were in a cell almost like a cement tomb. You came in through the back door, the back gate of the cell. There was a small outside area, very small courtyard. You could see sun. You were allowed out once a day. You could not talk to anybody. They had every cell block had a cell. They were mirrored spaces. One was outside, one was inside. They would do every other cell so the prisoners could not speak to each other and could not communicate. And you had that sunlight once a day. When you were inside the cell, it was dark, it was closed. I'll show you a few pictures in a minute, but you can't get that feeling in there until you see the small portal that was burrowed into the wall that was closed almost all day, but then it gave you food a few times a day. So it is very much like being encased in a tomb. When the Prison Society and the group of Quakers all came to do this great work, they told the world about it. Lafayette was there. So many major leaders from around the world came to see, how do we do this? How do we re-engage our citizens and bring people back? Because everybody should be brought back into our society. This is the mindset, the belief at the time. And very quickly, people were like, this doesn't seem right. Something seems off here. They tested it out at Walnut Street Jail. People very quickly showed signs of mental distress within days, within weeks. They ignored it because this is what happens in society, and this is what happens with humans. We have groupthink. We think we have a really good idea, and they put it into play. As you go through the archives of Eastern State, and we have a flourishing archives of written documents, of notes. I mean, it's a government facility, so everybody's taking notes on everything, but there's also an unbelievable amount of craftsmanship. That is very clearly evident right away that this is not a healthy environment, that they're having major cases of mental health, they're having suicides, all these pieces, but it falls apart quicker because they didn't have space for all the people. That's what actually makes it fall apart a little bit quicker. I'll get back to the cat in a minute. This is kind of a a large kind of epicenter. It's this first penitentiary in the world. And like I said, as we're grappling with democracy here in America, the world is grappling with democracy. There's a boom that starts as a ripple in America and reflects across the entire world. And yes, we have to nod to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, but they're city-states that had never been on a large scale like this. And so grappling with the duality of liberty, when you have liberty and when you remove liberty, how does that work? People were searching for a different way. This also is about the same time period. You have a mental health boom, and you start to see a different way of treating mental health in the world as well. So all these kind of like enlightenment thinking around health conditions and around humanity are coming at this time. They don't always make the right choices. As always, things go forward, they go back, they go forward, they go back. But it is this epicenter of the world. So when we think of anchors in America that tell the world to look at something in a different lens, we always think about Independence Hall. We always think about the most historic square mile in America, which is down near Independence Hall. It is that square mile there. But we also don't think of these other major sites like Eastern State and how it changed that society. And a part of that issue is the fact that we're not normalizing these conversations around this dialogue and not engaging in those conversations. So we have a tendency to say, look what we did. But we also at the same time need to examine, and these are the mistakes that we've made at the same time. And we can see that through the Constitution. We can see that in how we grapple with a democracy. As we kind of dive into it, I'll give you a little bit about the timeline of Eastern State, and then we'll look through some of those older pictures. So Eastern State, 1829, first inmate is housed at Eastern State. By 1880s, early 1900s, the full isolation is completely gone. They are constantly building on the site. Did I ask who's been to Eastern State? I should ask that question. Okay. You have to absolutely come. The symmetry is mind-blowing. It's a part of that feeling to feel like you're repenting. And it's also a way the system worked with less guards that you could be able to see this symmetry. But by early 1900s, they are adding cell block after cell block. They're extending the cell blocks up as well. By 1920s or 1910s, you have the first 3-story cell block. It's a fully cement cell block. It's 100% made by people who were incarcerated at the time as a part of their workforce development. Workforce development had always been a part of Eastern State as a part of the rehabilitation side of the penitentiary and never left it. So you can name all of these different trades that were built there, but also the unbelievable work that is done by the inmates while they're in their cells. So our artifact room is filled with these crafts, and the crafts were allowed to be sold on the outside of Eastern State. So they would work with the community to take the material, to sell them, and that would bring money back to the incarcerated people, back to different people that worked there that also sold crafts, but also would be able to be sent back to their family. So there's a period in America where everybody wanted a wooden boat in their house. We have hundreds of wooden boats at Eastern State. So much of this came back in the early 1994, 1996 by community members saying, oh, my dad used to work here. Oh, somebody I know was incarcerated here and our family had this piece. We wanted to give it back to the collection. So it is amazing what you can find from your own community on those collections. This is how they found it. These first 2 shots here in 1994. So it keeps being built. It keeps being built. It is massive. It is 11.5 acres. My staff was laughing at me today because we're looking at a site we're rehabbing and I couldn't figure out where I was looking at the blueprints. I was like, wait, where is this? It is unbelievably massive. It is filled. We have so many buildings, a lot of them in the middle of rehab or the beginning stages of rehab, but they filled in every single space. Originally, it had open farmland. It had sheep. It had cattle. It was self-sustaining. Every single cell had a flushing toilet. And I know this is a weird story to tell, but it's connected to solitary confinement. It had a toilet before the White House had toilets, because the only way you can keep somebody in solitary confinement is if they can't leave their cell to go to the restroom. So they would only be flushed once a day, and the guard would pull a lever and it would flush all the toilets at once. So all of these pieces, it was so innovative for its time, but they filled it in and they filled it in. So it's a mosaic of American history. You see pieces from 1822 to 1975. It closes in 1970 on a state level. It is then opened up again and owned by the city in 1971. The building and the land is technically owned by the city. It is run by Eastern State Penitentiary Historic Site. We are C3. It is a powerful site, but they left it abandoned. They left it abandoned from 1971 to 1994. And what they did, they stored cars there. They used it as a shooting range, all these different things, but they really just left it abandoned. The neighborhood was blooming by that time and really did not want a penitentiary right there. There had been escapes and they were very nervous about that. They closed it down. And in the early 90s, a conversation comes to demolish it, to pave it. This is when you get, like, I love this because it's like a rogue band of nerdy historians and architects that stop it. And so it's our original CEO, Sally Elk. She's fantastic. If you ever meet Sally Elk, ask her a million questions. She will tell you the best stories ever. Sally Elk is working for the Preservation Center in Philadelphia at the time. There's 5 different historians at Penn, and they're like, we can't let it get demolished. This Memorial Day weekend was our 30th anniversary of saving Eastern State. And we did a program where the team that originally saved Eastern State came and told their stories. The next program that we did was the team, all-female architect and environmental engineering team of preservationists who are still saving Eastern State. And then we did an entire program on the artifacts, including that building, which is an artifact in itself. But the way they saved it was to really convince the public to stand up and fight for it. One of our historians and our scholars said the funniest thing was they were going to save the outside walls. They weren't going to preserve the inside architecture. And he's like, and when we think about walls, humans have been making walls for millions, thousands of years. It's just another wall. But the inside architecture is more powerful and more unique than the architecture at Independence Hall. So I told David, his name is David Brownlee. He's a Penn professor. I was like, rewind, because I'm a big fan of Independence Hall. I'm like, could you say that again? Like, I needed to hear that more than once, but it's the uniqueness of the architecture that makes it so powerful. So when you go there, I hope you go there and touch the walls and the floors. Just remember to wash your hands, because they did use lead at the time and they did use silicate. So be really careful with it, but it is unbelievably powerful. They also had greenhouses on the site as well. But going back to the core and the mission of Eastern State, it was always around criminal justice reform. So when we think about criminal justice reform in America, we have to really anchor Eastern State as the first place to grapple with the country, with that question, not just in our country, but across the world, and say, can we establish justice differently? Can we think about how we reform the system we have and make it different? Can we get different outcomes? And for us at Eastern State, that is the question that anchors us in the past, but it is also the question that we ask everybody today. Is the system that we have established a fair and just system? What are those questions that we still grapple with? What are we doing? And how does this work over time? That question isn't done. It's an echo from the past that we keep coming back to. And that's what our work does. It brings us from the past to the modern period. Eastern State housed children. It housed women. It had multiple births. Many of the women in the 1800s kept their children at Eastern State while they were incarcerated. It housed the families of the people that worked there. They had children. People got married there. It has one of the first and only synagogues on a prison site that was built in the 1920s and then rehabbed in the 1950s and then saved by that original preservation team in 2009. You can see it. It has an original chapel. It has a church. It is an ecosystem of humanity where we grapple with these questions. So it is a very powerful tool to remind us to ask that question about today. Really fascinating pieces around this. Here's some of the original cells. You can see, I love this laser pointer. So this gentleman, this is the 1800s. He is in his cell, very much white plaster here. That gate would go into the back courtyard, which was the same size. And he was supposed to be working on some of the trades that he was building. There is art in people's cells because they were allowed to take materials back to their cells and paint in their rooms. They painted in the chapel. It is really powerful, the amazing amount of art, reading, and music that happened there. When you go to Eastern State, you're in a center area and you can see down every single cell block. Above you is the original library and music room. So people learn musical tours, they learn musical instruments, and they had stuff in their work. A really fascinating way to look at how society over 200 years tried to look at reform, made reforms, and then judge those reforms, made reforms and judge those reforms. Today, we have these conversations all the time, and there's people that come to our conversations and say the word reform in itself is dangerous because when you reform into a different norm that isn't safe. And some people believe completely differently on that and said we should be always striving to do better and to look for what the outcomes are. My real goal in this work is really to just put all those people on the same table at the same stage and put the conversation in the middle so we can talk about it as Americans and as citizens and say, what do we believe around this and where do we want to pull on it? Where do we want to stretch it a little bit further? And what other voices do we need at that table? So real quick, because I know I'm running out of time and Jason's going to be ready for Q&A. We are launching so much fun. If you hear here, we're doing a branding project, a strategic plan, and we are also redoing our website because our website is basically held together with some paper clips and duct tape right now. That's what happens to websites. They fall apart really quickly. And so we're really looking at what do we want to center ourselves in moving forward. And being there only a year, it was really powerful to see the amazing work that the team has been doing for years there. But I don't think has the amplification across the country that it should have. So some of that work that we're anchoring what we're doing into is national education leadership. Let's have conversations around the criminal justice system as a whole. Let's have dialogues around that because it's not just about while people are incarcerated. It is about the conversations that lead to incarceration within our schools and within our societies, but it's also about reentry programs and what happens with a reentry program and what is that like and how can we build a community together. So that's some of our national education discussions that we're working on. We launched a few different projects I'll show you in a second. Workforce development has been happening for over 6 years at Eastern State. There's 2 major programs. There's the LEAD Fellowship that works with people who are incarcerated. So when they come home, it's a reentry program where they are paid and they are supported through that work and they engage in conversations at the site, but also engage in conversations with our educational teams as well. So this LEAD Fellowship cohort is graduating on Thursday, and they have been working with local schools of kids who are in distress, who are on basically a form of parole, and they're working with them about choices in their life and ways that they can change it. We've had powerful conversations with the LEAD Fellowship, and we believe ensuring that people with lived experience while incarcerated and during incarceration come back and tell their stories and share their experience as well. We also have preservation trades, which I think is the most brilliant thing ever. Our team of preservationists said, we have 11.5 acres filled with buildings. Let's teach people a trade and some of the hardest trades to get into, but also the most needed trades to be in. Historic preservation. So we have masonry, we have metalworking, and we have carpentry. So they learn the trades, we work with Rebuild, we work with the unions, and as they graduate this pre-apprenticeship, it's all paid too. They are then placed in paying jobs that are apprenticeship and they can move in their career. They all pass the test as they go through. There's different tests for different areas, and they're ready to thrive through that. It has a 90% placement rate over a year. And these are pretty powerful. And it's really also pretty amazing to go into some of the rehab places in Philadelphia and see somebody that was in the workforce development and they come back and train kids in the program. So kids look to this field as an unbelievable, great career to go into. Last but not least, visitor experience. Our visitor experience needs to be reimagined. It's excellent right now, but it needs to be updated. We have a great conversation at the end of our visitor experience around prisons today, but that dialogue needs to go further and really unpack the connection between our law, our history, and incarceration over time. And we have a massive site to do that. So we're beginning that work now with a master plan and rehabbing the spaces. One of the things that we have to be extremely mindful of is that people who have lived and worked in prisons don't always want to come to a prison when they're off. It's hard for people. It's hard for people that go through that. And so we need to ensure that we have place there that is clean, that is a blank slate, so you can have a conversation and not feel that oppression that you feel when you walk through a jail, in a historic jail. Justice 101 was part of our education series that we launched this year. We saw 2,000 people in the first 4 series. The Collaboratory for Justice Education, we have 40 educators, K through 12, college, and in different museum sites around the country, helping us to build this material and this curriculum. And then here's the 2 workforce development pieces, visitor experience, what we're doing around that, and then just where we're going next. That site right there was the original church that is in the industrial building. It was called the industrial building because you got trades to work in the industry. So we're rehabbing this site. It is absolutely gorgeous. It will have a 250 seat auditorium at the top. We will ensure, because our preservationist won't let us take any history away. She's fantastic. And downstairs, the first floor will be classroom spaces for the trades, but also for student groups as well. So we're really excited about the work that we're doing. This is going to be our visitor center. We're looking at pop-up art installations. So a lot of strong work that we're doing, a lot of fun. We'd love to have you come visit us. And we always are looking for feedback and thoughts about ways that we can be more inclusive and accessible for all people to engage in the conversation. So thank you so much. We can go to questions next. Great.
Yeah, so please.
The cat, question mark.
Oh, thank you. I totally forgot about the cat. And I was like, why did she put it in the beginning? Because it's awkward to tell that story in the beginning. So when Eastern State was first rescued in the early to mid 90s, there was a feral cat colony, hundreds of cats apparently that lived there. I know, like horrible. And so they had to collect the cats. No cats were injured in this process. Because it was my first question. I'm like, what happened to the cats? Like, I'm not a huge cat fan, but I don't want any cat hurt. And so they had to make sure that they, got all their shots, got everything they need, and they placed them. It took them a while to place them, but there were thousands of cats there, which makes really funny stories when that team tells their stories, because they had to do hard hat tours. This is how they got the public engaged. They did hard hat tours, and talk about the 90s that you could just go in. I mean, it was covered in foliage. Like you couldn't walk without tripping on your face there at that time. I've seen the pictures, and that you could just come in, sign a waiver, and it would be okay. Like, wow, the 90s, totally different. They borrowed hard hats every weekend from all the construction companies in Philadelphia because they were historians. They didn't own all these hard hats, and they would give out the hard hats, but where the staff would store the hard hats, the cats would come and pee on them. So there's like horrible stories of so they take care of the cats, they get rid of the cats. That's phase 1. And artists, we have had over 200, I know, great story, over 250 art installations over the last 15 years there. And one of the first art installations was an artist who made 200 cat, whatever they're called, statues. There's the one right there. And almost all of them are gone. They either broke because they were very fragile. So they were the ghost cats of Eastern State. So the first time I went to Eastern State, this art installation was there, and you walked around and saw these white ghost cats everywhere. And it was trying to tell you the story of how they saved it and pulled that story out of people. There are 2 left. And I will say one is in my office. I put it right on the window where a real cat would sit. And every couple of days, a bunch of kids walk by and they're like, is it real? Is it real? And then it happened today. One of my staff members moves and the kids scream because they don't realize there are actually people in those rooms as well. But that I have not seen that cat, but one is in each of our main offices in our building. But that's the story. Thank you for reminding me. I totally would have blanked on that. Other questions?
I wanted to ask about the like Halloween, all that. Because I've personally been there twice through a school field trip, and what your thought process is on, hosting that, and if it benefits the penitentiary or if it's kind of hurtful.
Great question. It's literally what we're grappling with right now. So I like Halloween because I like candy. I just want to be really honest about that. I don't like to be scared. I had never gone to Halloween. And I started in July. And as October rolled around, the Halloween staff, who is a massive staff, it's 350 people who all work during Halloween and for extended periods of time. It's the largest hiring site for artists in Philadelphia. No other site hires that many artists. This is something that I learned very quickly from working there, that the Halloween team understands our mission probably than any other team at that site. And they are unbelievably creative and they respect the mission. And they're really an amazing, diverse team, different ages, different places that they come from, different skill sets. Fascinating. But they kept looking at me like, are you coming to Halloween nights? Are you coming to Halloween nights? I was like, I don't want to go to Halloween nights. I showed up because that's what you do. And apparently it was the running joke because I went through, there's like 10 different haunts. And I went through 3 and all I did was close my eyes and run top speed, which is a miracle that I didn't like wipe out and kill myself and like crack my head. I don't like being scared. There is a long history around Halloween at Eastern State. It used to be terror behind the walls. And that was when it was first found. It is absolutely the reason why Eastern State was saved. They made a significant amount of money from it and they were able to save the site and restore the site. And that money went right back into restoration. So the team really believes that this is a fundraiser. Now, the question that we're coming up in our society back and forth is that the right type of fundraiser you really want to do? And we see this across the country when we're looking at memorials, when we're looking at plantation sites for weddings. Like, we have to really unpack the history of every site we stand on and say, are we making these choices? Now, for me, this was a key question, and I'll be super transparent since clearly you can already tell I am. This is a key question I got during my interview process, which by the way was like a year. It was, what would you do about Halloween? And I have to answer, I answered it very honestly. I have problems with what if questions. It like one person like, what if Lincoln didn't die? It doesn't matter. Like, you can play that game a little bit, but really don't spend too much time on it because he did. You can play that game, but it doesn't lead you to anywhere. So if the same way you frame that question about Halloween is, if we are reliant on the funds that come through Halloween, then we really need to remove those purse strings from us as an organization before we can really have that conversation. So we've been engaging in dialogue around strengths and weaknesses. I've been engaging in data collection around that. And I've been with a lot of organizations that have made that path and have chosen exhibits or programs that didn't really fit the mission and it hurt them. For example, I was at the Constitution Center when we had Princess Diana. Did anybody see Princess Diana? It's a really pretty exhibit. There was a giant tiara. It made no sense that the Constitution Center had it. And you're like, it no sense. And I remember I was in charge of programs at the time. And my boss was like, Kerry, can you make a program that connects the dots between Princess Diana and the Constitution? I'm like, absolutely not. Like, this is when you just don't try to fix those two together. And the goal was, there was really important reasons why. We wanted to diversify our audience. We wanted to bring in a different audience and suck them into our mission and our content and make them fall in love with it, expose people to more, and then they'll come back for it. I've seen this happen at the Franklin when I was there. It happens everywhere. Everybody grapples with this and tries to expand it. This is the same thing in a way that Halloween Nights went very far away from terror. Terror was people who were incarcerated, ghost of prison guards. That is not what they do now. They do things that aren't in real existence, but you're still doing it on a site of trauma and you can't negate that. So they have done many different versions of it. There's a lot of education that happens as well. What I want to understand now that I have a year in is I want to understand, are people really learning from that experience? Are they coming back? Because as we cut those purse strings by increasing our funding in other areas, and we can do this, I also want to have the data to say, actually, we're not doing that. We are not making the mission more relevant to a different crew of people. Or, you know what, gang? We are doing that. We're actually bringing people in for Halloween nights, and they're learning about mass incarceration and making choices and taking action around that. Like, I need that data before I make that decision. And to be honest with you, I don't want to make that decision alone. I think the community needs to engage in that conversation. And I want to ensure that people with lived experience are at that table having that conversation. I just want to collect the data. We already discussed, I'm a super data nerd. So we start there on that, but I think you need to have an informed conversation, and it can't be emotional. I've had 7 different interviews with people in different like kind of areas of historic preservation about this question. And I have to be really honest about it. I don't know, but I know what we have to learn, and I know what we have to remove before we can even make that decision. And I also know that the Halloween team is the most creative team that I've ever met. And I'd love to sprinkle their brilliance on reimagining that museum site and how you can do that. I also do know too, that every time I go to a major event and somebody goes, oh, Halloween, I haven't been able to fix my face yet. And I keep like eyeball rolling. Like, I'm like, I want to be known, or I want Eastern State to be known for workforce development. I want it to be known for the question around liberty and freedom in America and justice and fairness. I want it to be known about the work we're doing around education. And if Halloween comes in fourth, I'm okay with that right now, but we're going to build that out. So sorry to give you a really long non-answer, but that's what we're thinking right now. But great question. Thank you for not holding back too. Any other questions? Oh, sorry. I totally broke your rules.
Do you have a template nationally where this has been tried in the past? I'm thinking of Alcatraz. I'm thinking it's more famous than this, but is there something that's
it shouldn't be. Sorry.
I think
we invented it. So
well, that's the question. So how is it? How are you, if you are presenting it nationally and looking at? I don't know what Alcatraz does as far as what you're doing here.
Yeah, so Alcatraz is amazing. I've been there a couple of times. I was really blown away by it. They're doing some amazing work. They did carbon copy one of our exhibits and put it there, which is a nice compliment, our Prisons Today exhibit. So this is the way the museum field has been moving in the last 15 years. Some of us have moved faster on this work of taking place, and no pun intended for Eastern State, but we're removing the walls. I think what COVID did for museums was like accelerate that work. So I was at the Constitution Center. I oversaw the museum and national education. We had been doing Zoom educational classroom materials, teaching. I would bring justices and lawyers and people with lived experience into classrooms across the country. And I'd have kids talking to each other, have adults talking to each other, all of that work. I got to work with Jeff Rosen, who's brilliant and ran the town hall program and could see that coming. We worked with Zoom for years. Thank you, Drexel. I'm giving full credit to Drexel on this because it was my doctorate program that they used, Drexel used Zoom. And that's why I used it at the Constitution Center. And so I was like, hey, there's this program. It was hysterical to think back now and the amount of times we had to explain to people what Zoom was. And it was like the worst explanation. It's like Skype. Like I remember my staff on the phone. It's kind of like Skype. But it doesn't suck. Like that's how they would explain it. Like it wouldn't drop you. And now everybody knows Zoom. And there's an entire generation of kids named Generation Z after Zoom. And I just realized that 2 days ago. I just learned that. So this model is what Colonial Williamsburg is doing. It's what the NCC did first. I will give full credit. We went from being a local organization that had some online programs, and within 4 days, we're reaching 270,000 people in each over the course of a year on online programs. It's not the same world. That's a different world than it is today. But we're looking at how do we reach that model. We also see probably 40% of our audience is international. So when you walk around the site, you hear all of these languages. It's an unbelievable international hub. So we have an audience for that. We need to experiment and test that out. But yeah, there's a lot of good work going on out there. And I know Founding Forward is doing that work as well. How do you take a nation of teachers and bring them to this historic site to train them and then send them out as your what do you call them? Ambassadors? I was going to go say apostles. This is the wrong word. Ambassadors to do that work moving forward, to have programs that are live streamed, that are zoomed out. We're all on that boat together, and we're learning from each other. And how does partnerships lift that up? But going towards an K through 12 will help reach that, going towards an education audience, and then really reaching out to what I refer to as like lifelong learners. How do we engage that? And then the workforce development work is being modeled so we can work with other museums and nonprofits so they can set up their own system too, because that needs to be place-based to support people in reentry.
I assume in the beginning there weren't a lot of murderers in there because they went to the gallows first rather than to the penitentiary. Of all the people that came for penance and reform, and I think you said the average was 2 years, maybe they were there. How about those that didn't reform and didn't have penance? Were there frequent flyers, people that were coming back all the time?
Yeah, and there's a lot. I mean, come on, there's Al Capone was there. So we're talking about not reforming. So originally the idea was that it was only 2 years. People stayed for much longer than that. You can see that in the records. You can see it in the notes from the law enforcement and the people that work there too. But what you can also see there is a lot of mental health issues too. You can see that very, very clearly around that work, but you'll see, oh, he's back. Oh, he's back again. And I think that's why so much of today's conversation is about recidivism and about the impact that it has on families, it has on communities. Because if we're not building and supporting people before, during, and after incarceration, we're going to have a system just self-perpetuates itself. So absolutely that happened, and you saw that. It is fascinating to walk through though, because you see some of unbelievably violent people, but you also see kind of different perspectives on it as well. So our goal, and when we think about a just society, we want to respect human dignity, but that means on all sides. That ensures that people are safe, that victim rights are at the table and being a part of the conversation. And that's some of the work we're launching. That's the Justice 101 series this year. And one of the key conversations is about restorative practices. And how do we really get to healing? It's not one-sided. It is multifaceted, but there's so many people in our community that are dealing and grappling with this. So 1 in every 4 kids has a close family member or a parent who has been incarcerated. 1 in every 2 adults has somebody in their close unit that has been incarcerated, but we're not talking about that and we don't know it. We had a reentry simulation the other day, and we have a talk back on it. And one of the people there said, like, I don't have anybody in my life that's been incarcerated. Half an hour into the program, she goes, oh, I do. Because we're not thinking, how does it affect our families? How does it affect our community? How does it affect the economics? It's something like $230 billion a year in Pennsylvania alone is affected by that job loss. So yes, that's why I think it's really important to talk about reentry, talk about the support that goes around it and the whole support around it too.
Time for just one more.
And
If you could give a very quick answer to it.
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm worse.
It seems kind of a silly question, but were there any executions carried out there, and did it have an impact on modern day thought on capital punishment? Great
question. We know executions were held there. They were brought to a different site. People did die there for lots of different reasons, but no executions. We did have a death row though. So they were held on site in death row. It's one of the newer blocks. I think it's 1940s, 1950s. It's actually one of the most powerful art installations on the site, in my opinion. It's weird to say it's my favorite, but it is my favorite because it's so powerful. But it did affect kind of the sentencing, but so much of the conversation is around solitary confinement. Who still has solitary confinement? There's only 25 states that ban solitary confinement, and Pennsylvania being one of them. But the debates around how long So even though they ban it, they still have it for a certain period of time. Same conversation around death penalty. And there was a Supreme Court case last year around the death penalty and the injection sites, because there are no medical people injecting that because it goes against their Hippocratic oath. I'm saying that wrong, but you know what I mean. So those conversations are ones that happened on site, happened as they were transferred, but also are happening today in that Justice 101 series. The reason why, and I'll make this really quick and stop talking, the reason why that spot is so powerful, when you walk around, and I'm bad with directions, but it's called West Drive. When you walk around West Drive, you hear music, you hear a piano being played, and it's off in a distance, and it's beautiful, but it's also clunky. It's not like you're going to some great orchestra, it's a clunky piano being played. And when you walk in, it pulls you into death row. It's coming from death row. And the artist, who was he's a formerly incarcerated person who is an artist. He worked and found in the archives of a prison in Texas a musical song that was written by a man on death row. He murdered 2 women. He was put to death. He was not musically inclined at all. And this is the first time the music was ever played in a public setting and ever heard. And it's a powerful moment because you're grappling with, this person was extremely violent and killed people, and that family and that community is not repaired from that. But this music also came from this person. And how do you put that together in the same mind, in the same humanity? So it's a great place for having those dialogues too.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kerry Sautner.
Thank you.
So just very quickly, our next program is next Monday at Liberty Hill. Medal of Honor recipient Sergeant Alan Lynch is going to be there to talk about his experiences in Vietnam. And that will be the last of our programs at Liberty Hill. This program will repeat at UL National in August, or a version of it, whatever comes that day. If you are staying around, please, downstairs, if you have dinner reservations, if you want to stay for dinner and don't have dinner reservations, if you want to have a drink at the bar, they would love to see you. So, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you very much.